Welcome, welcome. Good morning. I know it's a very different time for us to be coming together. But to get everyone from around the world to join us at the same time of being awake, here we are in different time zones today, which I'm very excited about. This week at CODEPINK, we had the last of our feminist summer school, again with Africa and Latin America. And I think that grounding ourselves in the world is so important in the insanity that we live in the belly of the beast, that there is a vibrant world that we have an enormous effect on, not a pretty effect, but enormous effect. And being aware of that, being aware of the small little place with too much influence, helps us meet the day in a very different way, in a fresher way, in a more honest way. Say living in the belly of the beast, in the middle of the empire, creates a lot of distortion in our thinking and how we relate to the world. And so it's been a fun week to have these global guests, and we start again with it today. So welcome, welcome. And this is a learning hour where we won't break out, and we're not going to start as we usually do, because I'm just blown away that we have these three very special guests, and that they're here where we as local peace practitioners have the gift of learning from our friends from the Emergence Networks. And I love that they say that they're the tricksters of the edges. And that is where change happens in permaculture. That is where the most aliveness of life is vibrating. So can we just today feel with our two breaths the vibrance of life, and that we have it, and just the gratitude for this breath we get to take into our hearts and our lungs and infuse ourselves. And now exhale, and one more deep breath of life. Thank you for grounding yourself for this gift that we're about to receive. So, you know, if the months have worn on and all our efforts to halt genocide wear us down and reveal to us, or to many, what has always been there, and that too many around the world have felt the ravages of: the insane, unstoppable violence of the war economy. It gets worse by the day. I often hear, how do I stop it? And what hope is there for the future if we can't stop it? You know, many people can imagine the end of the world, but they can't imagine the end of the war economy, you know, my name for capitalism. To stop it is to stop investing in ourselves. It is to stop investing ourselves in the war economy, and instead pivot to cultivating the future we want. But the addictions created in us by the war economy are hard to break, much as we desire to. Sometimes they overwhelm, you know, sometimes this overwhelm, you know, that churns around us, makes us like move into the addiction even more. And I have to say that this week it's been profound. It is like, feels like all I hear is, what can we do? And the simplest of things is to pivot away and to begin cultivating a future. And that just seems impossible to people. You know, I think why we can't imagine sometimes is because the war economy robs us of our imagination and our creativity and our relationship to life. There's something that I turn to these three to, because they each have been deeply a part of the world that calls itself the world, the structures of violence, seen it and have pivoted away and really represent that it's different than courage. It's the willingness to be in co-creation and the unknown that is. So I'm always in awe of like how many people gave so much for me to be here, believed in life, created a future, and that we've come in this moment of time where that drive to create a future for the next, to give more than we were given, to what is to come, doesn't seem to be as so hardwired in us. So, you know, how do we meet? How do we, as Báyò says, be available for the horrors and the possibility? So I want to go right in because I want to hear from them, these beautiful humans of the Emergence Network that come to us from around the world. So please meet Dr. Báyò Akómoláfé. He was born in Nigeria and steeped in Yoruba teachings as well as Western academia. He's trained in clinical psychology. He refers to himself as a renegade academic and is globally recognized for his poetic, unconventional, and soul-stirring views on our current global crisis and the opportunities we now have for social change. He is the author of 2 amazing books, These Wilds Beyond Our Fences, Letters to My Daughter on Humanity's Search for Home, and We Will Tell Our Own Story, The Lions of Africa Speak. And then Geci Karuri-Sebina, who is a visionary scholar practitioner based in Johannesburg, South Africa. She seamlessly blends deep expertise in urban planning, innovation, and digital governance with a heartfelt commitment to inclusion and pluralism. Her work, spanning academia, civic tech, and futures thinking, is infused with a sense of purpose and optimism, reflecting her belief in the power of collective action to shape our futures. And Aerin Dunford is a network weaver and connector of people, ideas, and organizations. She's a writer, upcycling artist, urban gardener, and newbie farmer. She believes that the work of unlearning and unpacking Western value systems and indoctrination and decolonizing the mind are vitally important to these strange end times or beginning times. Aerin is the independent consultant at CODEPINK Consultories, using the art of hosting and other participatory approaches as a basis for her work with organizations and groups of all kinds. Since the stillbirth of her son in 2018, she is also called to work with grief in new ways. She's been reflecting, writing, and convening others to metabolize loss together. So you can see all practitioners in the local peace economy. So thank all 3 of you for joining us today. We're deeply honored that you're sharing yourselves with us. And I'd like to start with you, Báyò, because, you know, it's all about the roots and where we're grounded and where's our place. So if you can bring us into the story of the creation of the Emergence Network and what you desire to offer with it. And then we'll move to Geci and Aerin to learn their path here and what they bring to the party, or should I say the carnival. Thank you.
Carnival, yes. Thank you, my sister, and greetings to my siblings from everywhere across the world. I just wanted to say that these my 2 sisters, who are my big sisters and are incredibly dear to me, are, I mean, those bios those bios do not quite capture the weight of their treasures and their gifts. Aerin leads the Emergence Network. I'm not sure if that was actually made explicit. And Professor Geci leads Dancing with Mountains, and between 2 of them, I'm the annoying fool and their little brother. And I'm very happy about that. But yes, Jody, uh, it's hard to tell the story of origins. I'm really not good with those ones. But I know that, you know, what comes to mind is Aerin and myself somewhere in Switzerland. Remember that? And what was the phrase again about something failing? Failing. Could you say it? Just say it, Aerin. What's the phrase?
Experimentation with a longing to fail.
Experimentation with a longing to fail. Those were the words. And this was in 2012 or 20, I don't know. The world was a lot more magical then, so to speak. The Emergence Network came from this desire to notice that even goodness is architecturally complicit in the perpetuation of harm. Right? That even goodness could sustain colonial relations. That being good didn't quite cut it, right? And I say this as Yoruba people say, a son of the soil, as a member of the global South, as a perennial recipient of goodness in whatever form it came, whether it came as in form of the IMF and its policies, and experts flying into the country to teach us how to be good democracies, or it came as the spillover of recycling from the global North, right? And our lands subsidizing this righteousness. It quickly dawned on some of us that the rectilinearity of goodness obscures too much. And this cannot be a time where we perform that goodness over and over again. We need some kind of, dare I call it, an obliquity. We need to be diagonal, almost like the planet, 23.5 degrees. We need to bend our posture in a certain kind of way in order to address a time that is exhausted, in which its goodness is caught up in a carousel of repetition. And so the Emergence Network came from that. The name came from my wife, EJ. It was supposed to be the Emergence Alliance or something like that. I don't know. I was caught up in the tea or something. And she said that was horrible. And she poked her head into the room and said the Emergence Network, right? And we've traveled a long way. I'm not going to get into the weeds of the history. But where we are now, through a meandering path, is experimentation, invitation to practice, and grounding in other kinds of subjectivities, other ways of noticing the world, which are not solutions, but are ways that we can address even the complicity of solutions in nourishing the problems that they're supposed to resolve. Right. I'll stop there for now.
How poetic. Thank you so much. And so, Geci, I didn't say what each of you did at the network because I knew it was more poetic than the title. And I preferred you to say how you came to the network and what role you play in this experiment. So I'll move to you next, Geci.
Thanks, Jody, and greetings to everybody. I'm joining you from Johannesburg, South Africa, and it's very, very cool to be here with all of these faces and all of these names. I see a lot more names here. So my current role is organizational architect at Dancing with Mountains, and maybe architect is a good place to start. It's one of the things I'm trained in. And in a way, it's one of the things I've been having, or one of the concepts I've been having to reframe in my life in terms of what it means I do and what it means I'm contributing to. Because the idea of architecting as a verb, I think, is what I feel more called to than the idea that it's a profession that builds stable and sturdy things into places that want, need, or deserve them. I think what I have found myself in a way, spending time with the likes of Báyò and Aerin is getting off a particular project where, coming from Kenya, where I was born, and going into an education system where I was trained to do development in many ways, and was very committed for very many years to doing the biggest thing possible to contribute to development, and of course Africa's development, because we're underdeveloped, or undeveloped maybe even, according to what I was learning. There was a lot to be learned, and there was a lot to be done, and I was quite committed to doing that in the biggest way I could. So worked in many very large organizations, and larger and larger and larger, but in a way getting more and more frustrated with what was actually being achieved. I met Báyò too long ago, but not long ago enough. He could have saved me a lot of time. But in engaging with him, I think what I did was to get away from this very big project of mine that I was, I wasn't failing at it. In fact, I was succeeding wonderfully, but at what I was increasingly unsure. But to get off of that and into the cracks, and we have been exploring since then, I think, this idea of Vunja, about getting into the cracks and looking for other ways, looking for otherwise. And it's been a wonderful space for me. And I think what I contribute to myself and to these spaces now is exactly more the unknowing, the sort of being very unsure of what I know or don't know, very unsure of what I'm doing most of the time, but feeling better and better about that than these places of great certainty that I occupied previously. And so architecting has become a wonderful craft of learning and scaffolding and watching things fall, and just trying to figure stuff out in a world that is extremely confusing to me. I see things every day that are very confusing to me. And learning how to be with that, and learning what one does if you're a so-called architect when you face that every day.
Thank you, Geci. We all face that every day. So we're going to circle back to like some of your the skill sets you've adopted to do that. Aerin, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jody. Thanks, Marie. Thanks, CODEPINK and the local peace economy. And welcome to all of our friends. I see lots of Emergence Network community members here. Hello, all of you. Thanks for being here. Yeah, I think maybe I would start this word weaver feels like really alive to express what it feels like is in my heart and wants to come through me in this particular human lifetime, this go round. I think it's the thing that Báyò first invited me to do for the Emergence Network back in 2018. So I was invited in a couple of years after it was seeded as kind of like a, I think my title back then was like Roots and Branches Weaver or something. And it was really like, how do we create a container in which these amazing curators and experimenters would feel a little bit more connected. And that's kind of, what I feel like I do. Now I'm doing that more on a community level, less internally, but connecting ideas and also weaving in. There's so many other entities and organizations around us and our ecosystems, partners and alliances that we're part of. So how do we really collaborate and work together to, I'm not going to say amplify. I think one of the things that's been really fascinating and a big learning edge for me is, within the capitalist kind of mindset, there's this whole idea about growth and visibility and how do we reach more people. But I feel like it's really important to be always questioning, where does that impulse come from? Because it feels like this endless growth, even if it's to do good work, is fraught with some of the same kinds of thinking around like bigger is better and we have to be visible. And quite frankly, the work of 10, I think, has to be, and the work of CODEPINK in some ways has to be fugitive in order for it to be effective. And so that's an interesting line to walk, how do we make what we're doing? I always remember thinking about Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad and like these kind of owl calls or secret codes that we can use so that people can find us, but it's actually not about being super visible above the radar, you know, because so much is susceptible to being co-opted, you know, and we're all co-opted all the time. I think what Báyò was sharing about how this idea of goodness can even feed into the systems and the ways of being and thinking and concepts of power that are destroying us all in a way. And I feel, yeah, over these last 7 years, almost 8 years, one of the things that's been really interesting is kind of bringing in a little bit more formality to the Emergence Network over the course of the last couple of years. So for a long time, it was just kind of really loose in conversations. And now it's felt like, well, actually, we need a team. We need resources. We need to be supported. We need to have like clarity about kind of what are the priorities of action that we're taking, you know, and that doesn't mean that we're not in the mess and the uncertainty and the not knowing. I think that's what we're here for. But it can help to have a container that feels a little bit more clear in order to have ways for people to engage with it, which is kind of where I feel like we are right now. So that's, yeah, and the work is really around a concept that I think both EJ and Báyò were part of creating, which is post-activism, which doesn't mean better than activism or more advanced than activism. It actually came, I think, originally from the idea of compost activism. So what happens when we allow the ways that we've thought that we have to do things to break down? You know, what kinds of what kind of nourishment, what kinds of imagination, what kind of generativity can come forth when we actually let things fall apart a little bit. And the last thing that I'll say, so we've been experimenting with that. So much of it has to do with practices related to being in the not knowing together, experimentation, art, festivals, bringing people together to do weird stuff with the hopes that, yeah, I think that there could be other ways of being. And I think just one thing that I want to like bring up as a question that I have before we move forward is like, there's a part of this that feels really difficult in terms of like that we're turning away from the war economy, or we're turning away from something that, you know, is really obviously not life-giving and generative and supportive. But there's a way in which the work at 10 for me and some of the programs that we're offering right now have to actually do with turning toward the pain. And so, you know, maybe we can long for something different. And I think many of us do, but I think we can't bypass the difficult emotions that are coming forward. And I think that's why we're seeing such an upsurge of spaces and offerings having to do with like holding our grief in a new way, you know? Yeah, so that's how I'll introduce myself and say those are some of the questions that I have. And I'm really grateful to be here.
Thank you. And, you know, that's definitely why we have the cycle of reconnection at the local peace economy, because even as you turn, the pain emerges, the grief emerges, and even the space that is so natural to Indigenous cultures that has a circle of reconnection in it, you know, where grief and care and celebration and joy are all kind of baked into the Indigenous culture. That has been stripped away from the war economy culture that we live inside of. So we agree with you. And Marie just posted it here, but the cycle of reconnection is core. And I want to go back to the word that you used that is so important, that arises out of our work, which is to meet need. And I think it says both to the desire to grow is not meeting need, it's meeting greed. And which, you know, really is at the core of the psychopathy of capitalism. And I love hearing that, you know, that we can believe, like you've just said, that you can walk off into the unknown and create magical experiences, let it wire your brain, and that what needs to happen will arise, and to not be afraid that it won't arise, that, but it can arise with a freshness and really meet the moment. So thank you for saying that, because I think I want to get to you, Báyò, like the hesitations people have as you've been going through this. What have the three of you learned? First, I want to say what you've witnessed in the process, and then I want to come to, and where are you now? Because Báyò, you even said, when things were fresher, when things were more alive. And so we are moving into a really constricted time. And so as fascism, the patterns of fascism become global, and what that does. So where do you see people's fears? Because what you're talking about, post-activism, we say, because at CODEPINK, we're not trying to get anyone to change. We're just shining a light on, scratching, it's not activism in that way. It's like, we're playing the role of, can we show you what power looks like really? Can we scratch at it and make it uncomfortable? But, that activism too much does this, and it's what you resist persists. And I also just asked someone, living part-time in China, I said, they were an activist, and I said, well, they couldn't imagine themselves not an activist. And I said, my desire of my life is to live like a Chinese person who knows how to ask for what they need locally and get what they need, lives in a democratic local democracy, a relationship of responsible to care for everyone, and lives their life, creating and living and dancing and taking care of their children with no anxiety. And that itself was frightening to my activist friend. So, what are we holding on to, and what have you seen people hold on to as you've invited them into the space of nothingness and not knowing? Whoever that's touching first, start, and we'll go to all three of you.
Geci, Aerin, you want to go? Geci, do I have your permission?
You have my permission, good sir.
Oh, all right, sister. All right, sister. Well, it is true. I don't inhabit the United States of America. I visit occasionally. But it is true what people say, and the rumors are getting to us over here on the other side of the globe, that fascism doesn't feel like a threat any longer. It feels like something that is real. And of course, the idea of fascism is essentially contested. What does it mean in contemporary political settings? I would argue that, even fascism migrates and becomes different, and it can show up in ways and forms that are familiar to us and usual, right? However, again, grounding my feet in the lands that hold me here, it's not just that I suspect fascism, I suspect freedom. I'm suspicious of the freedoms that the freedom that is supposed to be the counter agent to this evil thing called fascism, right? It seems the discourse in the United States, especially in the United States, is freedom versus fascism. But freedom is complicit in the creation of the Anthropocene. Freedom has meant the destruction of lands, of cultures, of languages. Freedom in its most alluring posture has led to regime changes across the globe, right? Like the underbelly of liberty, the contract, the social contract that binds American citizenship together is the idea that we are a city set upon a hill. Except the hidden costs of that infrastructure is the underbelly, right? the other things that are not spoken about, and the things that hide in the cracks of freedom. I'm not the first person to submit that freedom is becoming quickly a source of coercion, right? That freedom looks like today a tethering to a highly techno-bureaucratic complex that asks you to, if you're human, before you proceed into a website, right? Like the freedom is surveillance. Freedom is optimization. And that's exactly what whiteness knows how to do well. Whiteness is the promise of increasing optimization, except this optimization tracks along the pathway of transcendence. And transcendence is eternally oppositional to the material, right? It doesn't have space for the local or for the grounded or for the emergent. It wants to leave and escape. So if freedom looks like Elon Musk's phallic attempts at escaping planet Earth, then I'm not really drawn to that notion of freedom. So it seems to me that either this or that doesn't speak to my bodies. It doesn't speak, and I said bodies, plural. It doesn't speak to the many ways that I sense that I would like to show up in the world. So when you ask Jody that what is emergent for people, I guess that I sense very strongly a stuckness in the conversation. It's there, especially in the United States. There is a grounded, I dare say, concern, for instance, with diversity. Oh yeah, we need diversity. We need diversity. And as someone who presents with the skin that I do, yes, when I come to the United States, I feel it immediately, the need for that. At the same time, if you've spent the kind of amounts of time that I've spent traveling and waiting in airports, waiting for your bag at the carousel, you start to notice that it doesn't matter how many colorful boxes get on a carousel, the structure remains the same. It keeps going round and round and round. And I'm wondering about that. I'm wondering about the structure that counts what is diverse. I'm wondering about the structures that frame the conversational spaces that we're in. I'm wondering about how the safety is articulated. I'm wondering about the ways that we articulate responsibility within a very tight idea of pragmatism that lends itself to repetition. Right. So it seems that where we are is where the we here being those of us who are concerned about crisis, is that there is a difficulty with accepting that agency is not reducible to what we do, that we live in a world that exceeds us. Just like ants don't claim directional or cartographic genius. It's their pheromones that is directing, right? It's not that, oh, I'm going to do this. It's that we don't just do things, we are done with as well. We're part of weather patterns. We're part of intergenerational traumatic patterns. We're part of larger than life, larger than human firmaments of becoming and being and doing that we need to pay attention to. Logics repeat themselves in solutions that pretend to resolve the crisis that we're up against. And that's why it often feels like when I say these things, people are like, no, but we have to do something. I'm like, yes, but I wish I could tell you what your righteousness is doing, right? In the places that I come from. I'm not saying don't do stuff. I'm not saying don't protest. I'm not saying don't call your senators. Do all of that. We will worship the gods that we worship. We will build settlements in the way that we build it. We will we'll pay our bills. At the same time, is it possible that we have a politics that notices the cracks and notices the place where the archive is incomplete, that notices the place where eloquence falters, or where goodness acts against its own self, if you will? And that's the place I want to linger in. It's not and it's never going to be a dominant politics. What Aerin is leading is never going to be a dominant politics. It's never going to be the mainstream. The moment it becomes the mainstream, we've lost the plot, because this is the thread. I'm reminded of the Navajo spirit line, that practice in weaving where a single diagonal line runs through the woven fabric but exceeds it, right? As if longing for something else, as if noticing that the woven or the weaving exceeds the woven. Something beyond design is desired here. And they represent that with a threadbare line that goes beyond the fabric. I think that threadbare line, that diagonal oblique line that travels through the thread, the fabric, is exactly what this politics is about, what I mean by post-activism. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Geci or Aerin, did you want to add anything? What also just to what, as you've done this work, where do you witness the limitations? Because I think sometimes we need a mirror to look in. Oh, I do that. You know, it's like, what, that leap. And even maybe if you want to speak about your own leap, I know many of us in the local peace economy, we speak to where that moment was where it flips and no longer is the story that you were living in the story, but you're building a new one. And the other one you can see clearly in the ways that Báyò, you bring seeing clearly to the moment. Even the seeing clearly is the gift. That's the enoughness of where the next thing can happen from. So either of you? Okay,
Aerin, do you mind? Okay, cool. I was going to say, when you say when did the flip happen, and I flip-flop more than flip. And the reason is, in many ways, and then Báyò knows this, I find myself the willing victim of his ideas, because I appreciate and I've been learning a lot about what post-activism means, but it's not a comfortable place to reside. You asked what people fear, and it's probably what I fear as well, is when you're in places where really difficult things are happening, where the material conditions are tough, where people are going through unbearable, sometimes unbelievable circumstances, it can seem very, and Báyò used the term responsibility, it can seem very irresponsible not to respond in ways that might appear self-evident. What needs to be done in this situation is this, and the pragmatic or responsible thing to do is that. I was in a talk the other day, and I'm in many talks like this, where we talk about struggle and liberation and emancipation, and we have a lot of these conversations. And the answer is clear, what it is we need to do. But if the question is whether we are sustaining struggle by struggling, the immediate question is, what's the alternative? You know, then what? So what do I do if I'm not struggling? And these are not easy questions. We fear not having answers to these questions. I fear is a responsible thing to do. And so I flip-flop. There are days when I'm quite comfortable in asking the questions, and I can have a wonderful imagination, and I can seek to experiment and to explore and to be in that place of not knowing. But there are many days where that's not a comfortable place to be, and I come back to actually, what should I be doing? And that's tough. And that's tough. I'm in a university, that makes it a place for inquiry, so that makes it slightly easier. But I'm in many spaces that are traditional development spaces. I'm in many places that require probably fairly conventional development solutions, or appear to, and choosing not to participate in the activism that surrounds me. I'm in a country that's full of activists. Aerin, we've got a wonderful elder among us, Uncle Jay Naidu. I love to listen to him because he's such a wonderful illustration, and if you want, of what it looks like to go through real struggle, to be the activist, to get through it, and then to find yourself in a place that you'd never imagined activism would lead, and where you question everything. I'm in a country that's currently, actually, this past week, involved in a national dialogue trying to reimagine the Freedom Charter. And the country is actually split. There are people who think this is what we do, and there are many who say that's absolutely useless and can we stop wasting time. Of course, why they say that, again, there are many fractures there. But anyway, so for me, it's flip-flopping rather than flipping. Nothing is clear to me, but I think there are new questions that need to be asked, and I'm kind of in that space.
Thank you. Asking new questions. Thank you. And feeling comfortable in the flip-flop. Of where being where you are and feeling comfortable there. So thank you. Aerin.
Oh, thanks so much, Geci. Yeah, it just shifted what I was feeling to touch in my heart, in my imagination, and my sensibility to those places that are really suffering. I think it's something that a dilemma that lives in me always, right, is trying to understand that on the surface and immediately the kinds of experiments that we're engaged with don't necessarily have that kind of like front line on the ground sort of impact, which is actually why I love being in relationship with organizations like CODEPINK and with the work that you all are doing to seed this kind of local work. It's so important on the ground in context, and I think that's something that at 10 we're working toward, we're dreaming into, is like, how do we really seed local in-person nodes or knots, as we're calling them, to figure out what it means in our places, in the real relationships that we're entangled with, to kind of bring a sense of a different way of asking questions, of being in the world, but that also can have like material, tangible impacts in the lives of people who are really suffering. I think there's a challenge for me in noticing that there's a certain kind of, I'm going to just put it in these terms, although I think they're problematic in and of themselves, like economic class privilege, racial dynamics that make it so that often the people that we're most closely collaborating have the capacity in that way to show up for these things in a way that I think that people who are really like just surviving minute by minute, don't have. And so that's something that's difficult in me, is like, how can we meet kind of some sort of a need from these new ways of asking questions and understanding responsibility, but that isn't only convening a certain demographic. Like, that's definitely something that I struggle with. And then I think the other one, which is more personal for me, and I'll just share that this is currently happening for me, is like, it's both like recognizing my own insignificance, so having humility. And I think that in the day-to-day and the practical, this is an opportunity, at least for me, to live some of the things that Báyò is talking about when it comes to like other agencies. So a very specific example is we're putting on this event in New York City in a month. And from the very beginning, our little team has tasked itself to not put ourselves in the center of that the event itself has its own agency. And so how do we trust that we can just like support it, but we're not in the center, and I think that this is such a micro example of decentering the human, right? And it is so hard for me. Like, I like a good spreadsheet. I want things to work out. I want it to be successful. I want people to come. Like, you know what I mean? I have all those feelings that may very well come from my shaping and my formation in the Western modern, world. But it's a huge and worthwhile challenge to take myself out of that centered position and say, whatever is wanting to happen here, I can let it come through me, So I think that is one of my big challenges, to unhook myself from my past notions of success is another one that's just like, how do I really allow what's wanting to come through here to arise? And that is to work generatively with emergence, you know?
You know, when you were just talking, I remembered the acid test, the Grateful Dead acid test in San Francisco. And it's like, why did we 50 years ago have the capacity to like have somebody loan us a room and, you know, do something so outrageous as to give everybody acid, and that everyone can remember that night, right? Everyone that was there. And there's always a story of the connectivity of, so what happened in 50 years that what was kind of like part of a culture became like not even imaginable, that you just, you know, invite people to a party and see what emerges. So I think that what I'm hearing is there's the being present with the structure that is, but the structure that, when witnessed, has enormous amounts of violence in it. And the not agreeing to serve that structure, but instead, as you do, work at the edges to hear what is needed to, you know, be willing to walk off the cliffs that people see. They see them as cliffs, you know, like I'm walking off a cliff. So, you know, Báyò, you encourage people to walk off cliffs all the time, just by your being, just by sharing stories, just by being you, and, you know, creating these invitations. And when we were talking earlier, we were talking about how do you be available to, and I really want to come back to that, available, because we are just one human. We've been convinced in an empire that to have this megalomania, even as we aren't aware of it, that we are in a changing world that comes with it a lot of, you know, with it a lot of real fear, and not the made up fear, but real fears that we see enacted on people already, and they've been made more present to us. And then we know that if we keep being in the pattern will keep being the pattern. So what is it, if you could share what is it to be available? What does that muscle of availability look like for each of us to develop?
Thanks, sister. I don't know how many persons here have found themselves, it's probably just me. I'm expecting that everyone would just stare at me, you know, and wondering, what is he talking about? If you've been driving in a car with a GPS or map, whatever, and you suddenly felt this urge to be off the map, you're driving and the red triangle is going along, and that's you going along, but you kind of want to be you kind of want to lose the tracking. You kind of want to get out of the surveilling. Anyone? I said it. It's probably just me. You, Jody? Right? It's a feeling of, I don't want to be the dot on the screen. I want to be off the screen. I want to be out. I don't want to be locatable. It catches me sometimes. And maybe that's what I mean by available. Like, I theorize availability, not just as showing up, but availability as a querying of presence, so that our time and our relations are doing other kinds of work, especially the kind of work that composts the sensorial cultures that we share. And it's really important to say this, that you could be assiduously against something and still repeat its logic, right? You could be ferociously against an idea. You could do the work. You could show up and do the work, and still, because we don't live alone, we don't breathe alone, we are betweening species. We constantly do things within systems. within cultures, within atmospheres. And that's why some of these things are really hard to convey, especially in the stylized global north, which is heavily trained to think of itself as individuals acting upon the world. The heroic archetype is so strong, right? If only you can stand up and then you could demand change. But man, right? It's the world exceeds those demands. It's not a manager at a hotel that you can call and insist on seeing, right? The world misbehaves, right? It spills away from thresholds. So I guess for me, the idea of availability is, what other kinds of work, what are the kinds of burdens, what are the kinds of sensibilities can we cultivate now? What are the kinds of things to do are present, right? What Geci didn't mention about Jay Naidu was that he was a minister. He's in our community of practice right now, but he was labor, Geci, labor minister under Mandela.
The Reconstruction and Development Program, and then yes, he came from the unions. Yeah.
Union. So he worked with Mandela, and he has lots of stories to tell. Tells us stories all the time. And recently he said something that I had to write down. He said, I struggled and I struggled and I struggled, and I realized that struggle had become an institution. Right? What happens when the very thing we marshal to address our suffering becomes domesticated within suffering? And that's where the thesis of availability actually shines, where it shimmers. It's not just being available, it's that we're confronted with an intergenerational pattern that we need to make space for in conversations, in dialogue, in practice, right? Or else we risk just repeating these things over and over again while patting ourselves on the back that we're meeting our objectives, right? It feels really powerful to say this, not just from the stories coming from the global south, not just from indigenous knowledge systems, not just from the huge work that has been done by Black studies scholars and feminist ecologists, right? These things conspire to create a different notion of agency that doesn't fit too neatly into the liberal humanist idea of agency and sovereignty. And that's where the discomfort lies. A lot of the things that we're saying and we're inviting and we're still learning about ourselves are scandalous to modern imaginaries of change, right? Because we want to think that we are the ones changing things, but we never look back at the things we are indebted to, right? We start from the author that changes the world. We don't look at the world that moves the author that changes the world. We start from the I that moves instead of the movement that makes the I. And that really feels important. So I sense, I theorize, and there's no time to get into all the theoretical, theological underpinnings of this, but that the ways that the world reminds us that things are not as stable as they are. I've heard people wanting to do the work, for instance, to get rid of whiteness. And I'm like, wow, get rid of whiteness. How? it, you can't just, you can't just take it and throw it in the bin. Like there's no, it's not a getting rid of whiteness, right? Even the presumption that we can pick out the systems we want, that's exactly how whiteness thinks, right? By first isolating the subject that chooses, like, oh, you're not having a good consumer experience of your time on the planet. You're not giving us a 5-star rating, right? Oh, you can choose differently. Like it doesn't come down to the subject that chooses. We're dealing with principalities and powers that exceeds these ideas. So I feel that the world reminds us of meta-stability. This is Simondon and his philosophy. The idea that the world is amenable to a different kind of availability by sending cracks. And cracks are psychosocial, geo-spiritual forces of some kind. They clutch our throats when we want to insist on eloquence. They remind us that failure might be generative in ways that we may not anticipate. There are many ways to speak about cracks, but I think holding space for them, This is what the practice I call making sanctuary. I think making space for cracks, not making space for us, not keeping ourselves safe, as important as that work is. I think making space for those moments, those events, what Fred Moulton will call the breaks, right, is important work. Right? It's not the kind of work that is about inclusion. It's not the kind of work that is about justice. It goes beyond that. It addresses deep cosmological, ontological ways that we have been embodied. Right? So let me since I started started to say something about whiteness, that again, one of those tropes that I come across is being a good white person, right? We don't want good white people. It's not helpful at this point. It's that the whole enterprise needs composting. We don't want you to be good on the slave ship. We don't want you to install a solar panel there. We want off the ship. We want off the enterprise, but we cannot choose that unilaterally ourselves. We have to work within webs of relations. This is where humility and discomfort starts to set in, that we will not save ourselves by ourselves. We have to work with plants. We have to work with land. We have to work with intergenerational issues. We have to work with dreams. We have to work with our bellies. We have to work with fungi. This is all of us together. And that is where post-activism comes in, not to resist activism, but to say that morality could be a holding pattern that constitutes incarceration. We need to sniff out the erotic here. We need to sense for the ways that our senses are spilling and yearning for other kinds of bodily relations. What happens when we make space for that?
Wow. Thank you. I mean, we've almost come to the end of our hour, and I think you dropped so many truths there that it's going to take folks a while to, hold them in relationship. So thank you, Báyò. Geci and Aerin, do you want to leave this group with things to explore that have been useful for you?
Yeah, I'm glad Báyò came back to the humility and discomfort, because I think perhaps being able to sit with those is not easy, but it's obviously uncomfortable, and that's discomfort. But I think those are important places. I think for me, the certainty is about answers. It's about a willingness to if you want, engage with certain orthodoxies and appreciate their clarity and how legible they are and what comfort they can give. And to be away from that can be very difficult. I think what I find is not very difficult, however, is to be with people around me and to be in places and communities and in ways that I find warm and wonderful and pleasurable. And I do a lot of that. Báyò and I have been doing a lot of that, traveling around Nigeria and South Africa and learning and just being. India as well, actually, recently. And I think there's a lot more of that than we perhaps avail ourselves to in this search for the place where you're going to learn something or the place where you're going to do something. There's so much else that's around us. And I think just being attuned to that and being available for that has been a wonderful space. So I think I just agree. Yeah. Aerin?
Thanks, Geci. Yeah, thank you for reminding us and me about that sense of like warm relationality, which I think at least for me at 10, and there are many practitioners here in the space today that have been showing up over the last year and a half since we started doing like small practice experiments that I think feel that, and that's what I'm here for. I'm pretty sure, this time around anyways, like to cultivate and to enjoy, that relationality that gives so much. And I would just say, from all that Báyò shared about being available, I think what we're trying to do at 10 is really put into practice, like what does some of these ideas actually mean in our day-to-day lives, right? So I'll give an example, and there are several of you were there yesterday. We had a small little practice space where we were talking about the different pacings of things. This is coming out of Erin Manning's work and a recent webinar that we did. And we just did a little somatic practice of like moving at different rhythms. And what emerged for me was like really having the somatic experience of how I am made up of my relations. My friend, my Zapotec friend would say, Kiaro, we aren't individuals. We are not individuals. We are knots in a net. And so each of us is made of the single threads of relation, you know, with other people. But to be able to have that somatic experience is actually, I mean, I don't know, it was a beautiful little moment. And it was one that I was like, I don't even know if I want to do this. I was feeling super unmotivated. And so that's those magical somatic lived relational experiences, even if we don't understand where they're going, they're small scale, they seem invisible, they're important. I really feel that having those experiences moves us. So that's how we can, I think, become available, practice together, and keep caring for each other.
Oh, thank you. That's it. Yes, it is the practicing. It is the being. It is the taking ourselves to places new. And maybe there's no answers there, but there's the deepness that it enriches in us instead of the going around the eddy over and over again in the same pattern that makes it feel safe, but isn't safe for anyone, including ourselves. So, my deepest gratitude that you and all your time zones showed up for us today and nourished us with your wisdom, your experience, and your invitation into the beyond, and all it has to offer. Thank you for what you do. Folks in the chat, there's links that you can dive deeper into their work. So please take advantage of that. And then next week on Wednesday, our next main gathering, we're really going to talk about this time and how we can take what we heard here and create experiences for our communities. So thank you, deep gratitude. Marie, thank you for holding us in the containers. The containers have value, but we can continue to like make them in magical ways and see what containers can look like. So thank you. Much love to everyone and see you again soon.